There is so much nonsense out there about language. People believe all sorts of things without a shred of evidence and then confidently assert half-baked, crackpot theories to anybody who'll listen. And nowhere is this more damaging and more apparent than when we're talking about language learning. So today, I'm going to bust some myths. We can all fall prey to this stuff. Most people I've met who aren't linguists believe that their native language is either the world's most logical language, the world's hardest language. I'm looking at you, Dutch people who keep telling me that, or the world's oldest language. I hate to break it to you, but those are all somewhere between statistically implausible, totally unmeasurable, or just not possible. And I definitely harbored all sorts of false beliefs when I was younger, up to and including the idea that languages shape what you can and can't think, and that maybe anatomically modern people, ancient Greeks, who painted all sorts of things blue, maybe they couldn't see blue. What can I say? We all make mistakes, and younger me was a sucker for people confidently asserting things. Let me know in the comments what stuff like that you're embarrassed to have believed in the past. And a lot of my mistaken ideas were about language learning. Big one is that you just can keep doing the same ineffective things for long enough that something just clicks, and then you'll magically start thinking in your target language without translating if you just wait long enough for the magic click, I guess. So today, we're going to talk about language learning myths. Specifically 5 myths that might be holding you back in your language learning. If you're new here, I'm Dr. Taylor Jones. I've got a PhD in linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania, and I've published on everything from African American English to Zulu syntax, A to Z, not to mention Persian, Mandarin, and more. I love languages and linguistics, and I love language learning. I get so frustrated to see people set goals for themselves and then experience setback after setback because they believe lies. I'm Dr. Taylor Jones, and this is Language Jones. Today's video is sponsored by italki. italki is an online language learning platform offering personalized one-on-one lessons with native-speaking teachers. With italki, you get personalized content for your unique needs, interests, and goals because you select the teacher and they're not locked into fixed course content. And because it's one-on-one, you get undivided attention and instant feedback from your teacher.
יש לי משפחה בצרפת.
באמת?
באמת. אוקיי.
לא, זה מגניב.
ואנחנו, if I want to say we would like, so that's like I know הייתי רוצה, היינו רוצים. היינו רוצים.
You're not waiting around to hear somebody else think their way through an exercise out loud. Je pense que francaise est difficile. One of the reasons that I really like italki is that they help you improve listening and speaking with real conversations. Not only do you improve speaking and listening skills, but you'll have increased confidence from live interaction with real people. If you're not new to the channel, you already know how strongly I feel about this. You also learn authentic expressions, the way you actually speak a language, not from outdated textbooks. A lot of people studying Hebrew are shocked to find that the technically correct language from their handbook from the 1960s doesn't prepare them for how people speak the living language today. So with italki, you receive real-time feedback and guidance from language experts. You can immerse yourself in a wide variety of languages and cultures without living overseas, or if you live in New York, without going outside. And it's flexible and affordable learning. You pay per lesson with no subscriptions required. You can fit it to your budget and your schedule. If you think italki might be right for you, click through the link below in the description. Buy $10, get $5 for free using the code JONES2503. But be aware, the discounts are only available for the first 50 users, so you gotta act fast. Now back to the video. Before I get to debunking, I can't stand all those people out there just bunking. I need to do a little science-based intervention. Everybody loves a list of myths to bust, but there's actually pretty robust evidence that myth busting has this teensy-tiny little problem that it actually reinforces the false belief for a significant number of people exposed to the myth busting attempt. So I'm going to bust some myths here, but I'm not going to say the myth, thereby priming and reinforcing the false belief you might already have. Instead, I'm going to tell you the truth, and you can infer the false belief if you understand elementary logic. Or you can just go with it. I'm doing the much cooler shadow myth busting. Shadow myth is my D&D name, by the way. Just kidding, I've never played. And besides, shadow myth is actually just what you call Lamont Cranston's origin story. Anyway, without further ado, myth 1, age. You're not too old. Yeah, even you. And I'm not just saying this because my 97-year-old grandmother has a Duolingo streak that will make you cry. Not only is there a robust body of evidence that language study has all sorts of other benefits, like staving off dementia, but also you can learn a language at any age. Now, it's going to be harder. Regardless what influencers tell you, you can't actually learn like a baby. I'll probably make a video about that. There's a ton of empirical evidence that there's just a different kind of neuroplasticity that children have that sets their language learning apart from adult learning. So when your brain is done cooking and is ready for actual adult use, that's around 22 in women and 25 in men, insert your own joke here, it's going to be a little harder than if you had early childhood exposure to that language. But we also have better logic and pattern recognition and know how to set goals and use day planners and so on. So it's kind of a wash. Children's learning does border on magical, but it also takes a long ass time, and after 5 years of full-time language learning with 24/7 exposure, they only talk at the level of a 5-year-old. Lame. Kids are dumb. Now, if you want to sound like you always spoke that language, you're going to have to do a PhD in acoustic phonetics, totally understand physiology and sociolinguistics, and probably also join a spy agency or something. But if you want to speak well and clearly and understandably at the level of an intelligent adult, that's totally doable, and in 5 years with appropriate study methods, time management, and linguistic input, you should be speaking way better than a 5-year-old. It's like Aaliyah said, age ain't nothing but a number. I will say, learning a language does entail learning a new set of interlocking conceptual patterns. So the longer you've used just one for everything in your life, the more challenging and rewarding it will be to learn another, or even learn the underlying systems that your one way of doing things is built on. It's all about embracing a growth mindset. Myth 2, immersion. You do not need to immerse yourself to learn a language. Most multilingual people in the history of the world did not. And in fact, all those people telling you full immersion is the only way to learn are completely abusing the term. They end up describing reading books or listening to podcasts without translation. That's not full immersion. Full immersion is being dropped off in Paris and having nobody speak to you in English for anything, ever. Like Bart Simpson.
Here I've listened to nothing but French for the past 2 mois. Et je ne sais pas un mot. Eh! Mais je parle français maintenant. Incroyable!
Where does this come from? I think it comes from two related issues. The first is that misunderstanding of immersion, and the second is the correct idea that you should avoid translating through your L1. What does that mean? Let's say you're learning French. A lot of people have a mental block when they first study a new language where they want to process all of the information, that is, think, in English, and then do some computation to translate to French or whatever else. What this means is that instead of directly mapping a new label to a concept like un chat, instead, people want to map words to words, like un chat means a cat. This is already super duper slow if you're trying to have a conversation, but it completely falls apart once you start to get beyond naming the kinds of things you see in books for toddlers. So, do you have to immerse yourself? No, you don't even have to avoid translation all the time. But it will be much, much more effective to try to ditch translations as soon as you can when learning new things. For something like je vais m'installer ici, you can get that install myself actually means sit, but trying to use it all the times you say sit in English doesn't work. Nor does it work to try to map installer to every possible English meaning. In this case, it's more useful to recognize that that whole phrase is the kind of thing that you say in a particular social setting doing a particular thing. This is where devouring tons of content, whether it's video, podcasts, books, or whatever, comes in handy. But reading a lot and translating very little is actually just called reading a lot, not immersion. People love to oversell their approaches. Myth number 3. Grammar. Hilariously, YouTube's stupid LLM wanted me to make an entire video about how grammar doesn't matter and that the importance of grammar is a myth. After all, that's the kind of thing that people say in videos that do well. Well, buckle up, chucklefuck, because that's back-asswards. I gotta stop watching physics, Duck. Here's the deal. Grammar is the rules of the road. It's how all the pieces fit together. Can you make yourself understood with just a jumble of words? All the nouns in the wrong places and with the wrong case marking and verbs conjugated wrong? Like to claim can you people that, but bullshit. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant people like to claim that you can, but that's bullshit. Now here's the problem. As with all of these, there's a tiny little kernel of truth here that some of you need. I've told this story before, but one of the ways my wife, who got straight A's in high school French for 4 solid years, actually got herself speaking French was a bit of a mean trick I played on her. We visited my family, and I faked a stomach bug. I literally just read in the bathroom for a while. You have to know 2 things to know why this worked. First, my aunt does not speak a lick of English. She's like Inspector Clouseau.
Hamburger.
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 Ham.
M.
Bur.
Bur.
Gur.
Gah.
I would like to buy a hamburger.
I would like to buy a hamburger.
And second, my wife knew enough to communicate, but she was paralyzed by conjugating things perfectly in her head. You know, the silent letters. Like, does this get a silent S at the end or a silent T? After all, she'd been taught that that was extremely important. So there's a sweet spot. You should absolutely learn how to correctly communicate the ideas you have with the appropriate structures. But you also don't need to know every structure in the language to be able to improvise and adapt, and start a YouTube channel where you shock natives. And if you pay attention to context, you can often figure out a lot of what's happening, even if you're not catching all the grammar or every word. But make no mistake, this is not speaking and understanding the language well. This is getting by despite not speaking well. So yeah, grammar matters, but don't be paralyzed by that fact. Just, learn it. But don't let still being in the process of learning it trick you into thinking that you can't understand anything yet. There's a lot you can get by with. Myth number 4, talent. Do some people just have a knack for learning a language? I don't know, probably. But I'll tell you what my mother told me when I was a child. She knew I was smart from a young age, and she told me, you have a stallion, but any idiot on a donkey will go farther than you if you don't tame it. How's that for homespun and folksy? Apologies to any ADHDers watching right now and feeling judged as their stallions run around in circles, but this is really about setting up structure and consistency so you can just keep moving towards the goal, even if you take some side excursions. Like looking up how they break stallions. Do that after you watch this video, not right now. And probably before looking up if it was Dances with Wolves where Kevin Costner had that horse that was running in circles. It definitely wasn't Waterworld, that's for sure. People don't really appreciate The Postman, but it was a post-apocalyptic classic, the Kevin Costner one where he recites Shakespeare, not the 1994 romantic comedy based on the poems of Pablo Neruda. Should I learn Spanish to read those in the original? See, I told you I live on that side of town, even if I don't rise to the level of a diagnosis. Anyway, the name of the game is motivation, effort, strategy, and consistency for language learning success. It's a really long name. And motivation is something that's kind of about routine and strategy anyway. There are days that even I, Language W. Jones, am like, ugh, I hate languages. Why did I study linguistics? What a waste of a life. There's too many of them, and they're all confusing. I don't want to learn anything. And that's how I know I haven't gotten enough food and sleep recently. Or I'm coming down with something. What definitely doesn't work is beating yourself up for not feeling motivated. I've got some tips in other videos, and I'll probably make a dedicated video soon, but successful language study is a marathon, not a sprint. But marathons also, have a finish line. At a certain point, if you're not actually moving, you're not running the NYC Marathon, you just live in the Bronx. Don't live in the Bronx. But things like a short-term achievable goal, setting aside specific time to get there and incentivizing that routine, say with a coffee and a cookie and a comfortable place to study, all that stuff will all help with motivation and successful outcomes, along with self-care. You're not going to learn as much if you're sleep deprived and malnourished. And are there people who are just better at learning languages and who do so faster? They're just wired that way? Unless your name is Richard Simcott or Luca Lamparelli, then yes, definitely. So what? You don't need to worry about them. Do you. It's like Danny Glover said, don't be mad because I'm doing me better than you doing you. Just go do you. Myth 5. Vocab. This is another where YouTube's LLM is wrong, and that means you're going to be getting a lot of confidently incorrect information in this domain on YouTube. Specifically, people will tell you that vocabulary is not important. Hogwash. That word, hogwash, appears about 7 times in 100 million words, according to the OED. So if you don't learn enough vocabulary, how would you understand what I meant other than by context clues? Is it really going to help you if I explain by telling you that it means the same as if I called it balderdash? But there is, again, a kernel of truth. Sometimes people focus on vocabulary at the expense of everything else, and they do so in a way that's frankly stupid. Other languages are not simply a cipher for English or whatever your first language is. And for English speakers, learning closely related languages that there's been a lot of exchange with, languages like German and Dutch or French and Spanish, there are a lot of words that effectively mean exactly the same thing and sound a lot alike. So you can fall into the trap of mapping table to tisch or table or mesa and then thinking that we can do the same thing for more advanced vocabulary. But very quickly things start to balloon out of control. What are all the meanings of put in English? And when you learn a word that overlaps with some but not all of them, like leaneach in Hebrew or posé in French, what do? If you're just mapping words to words, what you actually do is end up with a bunch of flashcards with put on one side and different words in your target language on the other. And some of those different words might also be mapped to multiple English words on the first side of the flashcard with a bunch of different flashcards. It's a mess. On top of that, words aren't enough. They fit together into phrases and sentences, that is, larger and larger structures. They're not always decomposable either. So you can know kick and bucket, but not know what it means to kick the bucket. Or walk and eggshells, well, you get the idea. So we have to learn vocabulary, but I really want to emphasize the importance of understanding language structure and context. And to learn that vocabulary and be able to use it, we should be actively listening, reading, and speaking in real-world communicative contexts, or at a minimum, including a nod to them. So if you're going to do flashcards with vocabulary because, spaced repetition is effective for learning, have the words you're learning in context too. Ideally, you should learn vocabulary through real-world situations and engage in content, like today's sponsor. So let's conclude and summarize. You should embrace effective strategies for language learning success. You're not too old. That's a myth. You don't need full immersion or nothing, and most of the people selling you on full immersion have completely redefined the word to be practically meaningless. You do need to learn grammar, but you should be able to get a good reference and bang that out quickly. If you're just doing grammar exercise after grammar exercise with no relationship to actual communication, it's a waste of time. You're basically just doing amateur linguistics, not actual language learning. You don't need to be especially talented, you just need to be diligent and consistent. And you do need to learn lots of vocabulary, but you should be developing that as much as possible in real context. Although, I'm not going to tell you not to memorize a big old list of words and just wait for context to activate them, Winter Soldier style. I do that sometimes. It works okay. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, please like and subscribe for additional resources and tips and videos basically every week. The pace is killing me. Please leave me a comment for the algorithm, and if you want to support the channel, you can do so right here on YouTube with super thanks or on patreon.com/languagejones. Those two new channels are still in the works, and I'll link the description once they're live, all the way live. Until next time, happy learning.